Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Statement Podcast. I would like you to know that I enjoy having you around here. So if you are new to this space, please don't forget to click the subscribe button. It doesn't cost a penny, so it's a good way also of supporting the channel. So today I'm going to talk about Zimbabwe's underdevelopment, which is often blamed on corruption. Sometimes it's also blamed on sanctions or even external conspiracies. But what if I tell you that the real problems is who we choose to lead us? For decades, Zimbabwe as a country has been ruled by loyal politicians, men and women trained to argue in courtrooms rather than design power plants, factories, or railways. The result is we now have a country that wins legal battles but loses the development war. In today's episode of the Statement Podcast, I am unpacking the lawyer politician governance crisis that Zimbabwe is today, showing how this over-reliance on legal minds has trapped Zimbabwe in endless court fights and statutory decrees. While countries that are being led by technocrats like your China and your Singapore, they have raced ahead with industrialization. Stay tuned, because by the end of this discussion, I am going to lay out practical reforms that could finally rewire our politics towards delivery, not just debate. So here is a clear rundown of top political leaders who trained who trained and who practiced as lawyers. So I'm going to start with the ruling ZANU-PF party. And I think the first candidate who was the Secretary General of the party was Ebedi Chitepo, and he is the man that set a precedent. He is one of the very first nationalist leaders in Zimbabwe with a legal background. His prominence and tragic assassination, I may add, it reinforced the perception that lawyers and legally trained individuals were natural leaders of nationalist and post-colonial politics. This may have created a pipeline effect, what we call a pipeline effect, which cemented the lawyer politician archetype in Zimbabwe's political culture. Even if you look at all the young ones who have been practicing politics, the middle-aged ones, and even the old-aged one. I mean, your Dexter Nduna, he just graduated from law. He is not a young one, of course, but every practicing politician and those who are aspiring to be politicians, they are all going the same way to study law. And after Ebedi Chitepo, we had Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe was initially an educationist. I'm not sure whether he graduated with law. I'm not sure anymore, but I think we grew up knowing that Robert Mugabe had graduated as a lawyer. But recent revelations from the president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, highlights that he might have failed his studies. But there are some sources which say, in as much as he did law, it was only limited to some law courses. Now from Robert Mugabe, now we have Emmerson Mnangagwa, who is the current president. He studied law at the University of Zambia and was admitted to the Zambian bar before he entered politics. Now, then there's a curious case also of David Kudakwashe Mnangagwa. As the Deputy Minister of Finance, he is the son of the current president. He holds an LLB from the University of Zimbabwe, in addition to actuarial science background. Now, why have I included him and why have I said a curious case? Because for me, he is one to watch. I strongly believe that the Vision 2030 strategy is solely to bring this guy to the presidency. I have argued over and over again that in 2028, he does not qualify to be president or to contest because he will be under the age of 40. and it's going to reach 40 years in 2029. Now, there's no case for 2029, but for 2030. So I strongly believe, I know it may sound far-fetched, and I admit so, but I think a way is being paved for him to finally assume the presidency post Emerson Mnangagwa. I have argued for this in our previous episodes, so you may want to listen to some of them. Right. And then we go even to opposition, political parties, opposition side of things. Currently, we have Nelson Chamisa, who is definitely the leading opposition candidate in Zimbabwean politics. He is a former CCC leader, former MDC Alliance leader. He holds a law degree from the University of Zimbabwe and is a registered lawyer. But before he did law, I'm aware he did political science. I'm not sure anymore, but I think he also did masters in international relations. And I think he also has a diploma in journalism. So you would see having all these qualifications, but he also decided to go and study law as if it's the one qualification which really measures you up to be a political leader in Zimbabwe. Apart from Nelson Chamisa, we also have very key opposition stalwarts like Tendai Biti. He's a former finance minister and is a prominent opposition leader, a practicing lawyer as well. We have got Welshman Ngube, former MDC leader. Currently is the leader of the CCC. Well, maybe one of the factions of the CCC, to be fair. Is also a professor of law. And then we have got Douglas Monzora, who is MDC Changrai president. He is a lawyer by profession, and I think he's still practicing as well. And then we can mention many other key figures in the politics of Zimbabwe, like Advocate Tawane Mpofu. Though he's not a political leader, he has been a very central legal figure for the opposition, especially in election litigation. You can talk of individuals like Fadzai Mahere. Those are the people that you think of. You can see where the politics is headed, and you can see where the vibe is. It's in the lawyers. Other notable figures in ZANU-PF, you can talk of individuals like Edson Shobo, a very prominent ZANU-PF intellectual and a lawyer who helped draft the constitution. You can speak of, he is even currently practicing, Patrick Chinamasa. He is still practicing, politics. He's a former minister and ZANU-PF secretary for legal affairs. You can speak of Jonathan Moyo. Jonathan Moyo was he did public administration, political science and public administration. I'm not sure if they were still joined at the University of Zimbabwe, but I know by the time we went to do political science, they had been separated, political science and public administration. So he was a professor in that field, and later on, before 2017, the coup of 2017, I know by the time of the coup, he was doing law at the University of Zimbabwe. This is a man who is a very accomplished political scientist, political administrator. He has been there, he has been in it all, and yet you see him also studying law. You have got even young ones like Tafadzwa Mugbadi. I'm not sure what he had studied before, but I know he recently graduated with also law, I think last year. So you can see the gist of the matter. So my observation is clearly Zimbabwe's political elite across both ruling party and opposition has been disproportionately composed of lawyers. And this helps explain why politics often plays out in courtrooms in Zimbabwe. Constitutional debates and legal wrangles rather than technocratic development-oriented policymaking. By contrast, engineers, economists, doctors, and other technocrats, they remain underrepresented at the very top of Zimbabwe's political hierarchy. And my analysis is that there are strands of political theory. This is not new in Zimbabwe. It's not a unique feature in Zimbabwe. It has been studied even way before. So there are strands in political theory and political economy that deal with the relationship between the academic and professional backgrounds of leaders and the developmental outcomes of their countries. While no single grand theory explicitly says lawyers in politics cause underdevelopment, there are relevant frameworks and empirical studies that explain this phenomenon. The first one being the elite theory and leadership sociology. Now, elite theorists like C. Wright Mills, they argue that the background, those undergrads of political science, you must know these theorists. They are very popular and commonly studied theories. So they argued that the background and composition of the political elite matter for policy outcomes. If elites are dominated by a single profession, for example, lawyers, which is the profession in question, policy tends to reflect the worldview and skill set of that profession. Now, in many African states, including Zimbabwe, lawyer politicians, they emphasize legal battles, constitutional wrangling, and courtroom politics rather than the technical or developmental policy making. This may lead to over-politicization of governance and underinvestment in technocratic, science-driven reforms. Take a look at how ED used Chabangu to collapse Nelson Chamisa. It was legalistic in nature. The 2008 elections, in his own words, ED said, as a lawyer, I was aware of the clause that allowed for a runoff if there was no outright winner in the elections. They would take every battle to the court, and the courts finally, they successfully captured them. So they controlled the courts. So you can see the focus. Let's control the courts. If we control the courts, we control politics, because that's the gist. They are lawyers. That's the best way of, or that's their line of thinking. That's where their strength lies. Now, the second theory being technocracy versus legalism in governance. Now, this theory, it asserts that development requires leaders with expertise in economics, engineering, science, natural science, that is public administration, etc. You can see Harold Laswell, Daniel Bell, and more recently works on technocratic governance in East Asia. Countries like Singapore, South Korea, and China, they have invested in technocratic leadership. So you have technocratic leadership pipelines in these countries. Engineers, economists, your scientists, natural scientists, I must add, instead of your lawyer politicians. This is often credited for their rapid industrialization. In the case of China, we had Jiang Zemin. I'm not good at the pronunciation of Chinese names, but he was the president from 1993 to 2003. He was an electrical engineer. I studied electrical engineering. He worked as an engineer in factories before he entered politics. As president, he oversaw Chinese deep integration into the global economy and accession to the World Trade Organization. And then secondly, he had Hu Jintao. He was the president from 2003 to 2013. So I want you to see something here. The first one, 1993 to 2003, that's 10 years. And then the second one, Hu Jintao, 2003 to 2013, that's also 10 years. He trained as a hydraulic engineer at the Tsinghua University. He worked on hydropower projects before even moving into part administration. So as a side comment, I must add, what did many of our ministers have achieved to earn their stripes to be appointed as ministers in Zimbabwe? So you have got Kazembe. What has he done before? What do we know him for? Ziyambi, what has he done before? What do we know him for? What has he achieved before? Tori Raimoy, what has he done before? What has he achieved to qualify to be appointed a minister? You have got Daniel Garwe. For all we know, he is a builder. You have got John Fan Mswere. What has he done before? What has he achieved before to earn his stripes to be appointed a minister? The Minister of ICT, I knew him as an actor of Studio 263. I was a huge fan of Studio 263. Back then I was a lot younger. You've got your Barbara Rodzi. What has she done? What has she achieved before to command such a post as a minister of the Home Ministry? So, come to think of it, really, it's one become very curious. How do we end up having ministers who have no track record of succeeding in anything before? Yet, today they are at the top of ministries, running ministries, directing policy, crafting policy, implementing policy. The CEO, president and chairman of probably the largest telecoms company in Africa, the man is a Zimbabwean. Is Adam Tambara is a director today at the University of Johannesburg in one of their departments. But in Zimbabwe, we have a vice chancellor at the University of Zimbabwe who completely seems and appears to have no idea what he is doing. And we have many talented Zimbabweans who are outside, not only outside, even within Zimbabwe, that can do these jobs better, that are better qualified to do these jobs, but they are nowhere near those positions. Okay, let me continue. Number 3, we have got Xi Jinping, the current president. He was president from 2013 is to the current president. Now, this one is bucked the trend. He has done not only 10 years, but he has done now, this is his 12th years, I would like to believe, 2013 to 2025. That must be 12 years. No Shamarta president, what is it? So he has 12 years in power. Putin is also another friend of the president, or our president is their friend. I don't know which is which. 26 years in power. You have got Lukashenko of Belarus. He has been in power for 31 years. Since 1994. So, do we really think Emerson Mnangagwa is going to leave power in 2028 after 8 years? Not counting the 1.5 years that he did after the coup. I don't see how I'm not sure. I don't believe so. All right. But Xi Jinping, he studied chemical engineering at Tsinghua University also. He later earned a doctorate in law, I must add. But his core background is in engineering. His leadership, he mixes technocratic pragmatism with centralized party control. And then we can talk of even their prime ministers, Lek Hyang. He was premier 2013 to 2023. So a premier, he goes along with the president. So he studied law at Peking University, but later earned a PhD in economics. Not an engineering program, but often included in the technocratic elites. Then we have got Wen Jiabao. He was premier 2003 to 2013. He trained as a geological engineer at Beijing Institute of Technology of Geology. He worked as a geologist before entering politics. And then we also have Zhu Rongji, premier in 1998, from 1998 to 2003. He studied electrical engineering at the Tsinghua University again. This is a top university in China. He served as an engineer before becoming an economic reformer, credited with restructuring state-owned enterprises and stabilizing the renminbi. Renminbi is the currency of China. Renminbi means the currency of the people. So he is credited with stabilizing the currency. Their technical training instilled a mindset of problem solving, long-term planning, and infrastructure development. Now, this contrasts heavily and sharply with Zimbabwe's lawyer-heavy leadership, which leans towards legalism, litigation, and constitutional wrangling, rather than technocratic delivery. Now, by contrast, an over-representation of lawyers in politics, as seen in Zimbabwe, many former colonial states also, and even in the U.S. Congress, this can lead to a political culture centered on procedure, centered on litigation, centered on rhetoric, often at the expense of pragmatic economic policy. And then the third theory being human capital and leaders, human capital of leaders and development. This is part of political economy research. So researchers like Jones and Oken, Besley, Easterly, and Pennings, leaders with higher education in economics, your STEM subjects, Military, they also include military and engineering training as statistically associated with the higher growth rates. Low trend leaders tend to score lower on economic performance indicators because their training is oriented towards adversarial reasoning and legal frameworks, not resource allocation, not industrial planning, or even technical innovation. Now, the fourth one, which might be the last one, is the post-colonial statecraft and path independence theory. In many African countries, colonial administrations relied heavily on lawyers and clerks for governance. After independence, lawyers dominated the nationalist movements and carried over to leadership. This created what Mahmoud Mabdan is from Uganda, is a very prominent author and a political scientist. So Mahmoud Mabdan, he calls a legalistic state, one obsessed with rules, control, and legitimacy struggles, but weak on transformative developmental policy. This is very intrinsic, even in the way we run our economy in Zimbabwe. Two main rules and statutory instruments. So let me take you through some of those, because Zimbabwe's Treasury and Ministry of Finance, for instance, they have increasingly relied on lawfare in public finance rather than technocratic, evidence-driven economic management. For them, like a quick fixes, they are more attractive to lawyers because they are fast, they are authoritative, and so they centralize power in the executive. So let's lay out a timeline of how Zimbabwe's economy has been run through statutory instruments. I'm going to refer to them as SIs instead of systematic economic planning. This will show how the Ministry of Finance in Zimbabwe and the Treasury, they lean on lawfare economics. So the statutory instrument, the first one of, I'm not going to talk about all of them to mention all of them. I'm just going to mention a few from 2019. So February 2019, statutory instrument 33 of 2019, the RTGS dollar creation. This statutory instrument led to the creation of the RTGS dollar. It converted US dollar balances in local bank accounts into a new currency. It was called RTGS dollars. Overnight, savings were redenominated and values were wiped out. Now, the problem is that the implementation was by decree, not by parliamentary finance law. The effect is that it destroys confidence in the banking sector. And the confidence of the banking sector had been depreciating for the longest time in Zimbabwe. And then the second one was a statutory instrument, the SI 142 of 2019. That was June 2019. And what did it do? It abolished multi-currency system. It banned the use of the US dollar, the rand, and other foreign currencies for domestic transactions. It also made the RTGS the sole legal tender in Zimbabwe. The problem is that no broad consultation was done. A law was imposed very suddenly. And the effect is that it fueled inflation and the black market for forex. And then we have got the third one, which is statutory instrument 185, SI 185 of 2020, which relaxed the ban or partial dollarization. It reversed SI 142 by allowing business to accept forex again. And then the problem is that it's flip-flopping. It showed instability of rule by decree, because one day you make a decree pronouncing something, and then the next day you make a decree or stopping or removing the previous decree. So it's flip-flopping, and the effect is that whatever partial stabilization it might have brought, but it reinforces public investor, public, not only public, but also the investor perception of policy inconsistency. And then the fourth one being SI 65 of 2020, which impacted gold delivery rules, fidelity printers and refiners. It required all gold producers to sell to fidelity printers. The problem is it is centralization by decree, and it also created rent seeking and leakages. The effect is that it stimulated smuggling as miners sought better forex prices outside the official system. But probably this centralization we have been learning of recent, that Scott Sagupkanya, I think we all know Scott, a gold dealer. He is in a contract with Fidelity or the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, I'm not sure which is which, where he goes out and buys gold from informal traders on behalf of Fidelity, because miners, especially small scale miners, do not all have access to Fidelity. But Scott, he has infrastructure, he has people around the country where gold mining is being done, and he's also buying gold from these small scale miners. Probably in a way why gold buying has been centralized towards Fidelity printers, but they have also come up with their own creative ways to make sure that they reach even the smallest small-scale Mkorokosa who is down there in Saka. So the effect, though, it stimulated smuggling as miners sought better forex prices outside the official system. Then number 5, we've got SI 127 of 2021, forex offenses and penalties. This criminalized businesses that charged in forex or priced above the official exchange rates. The problem is over-criminalization of market activity, and the effect is that it creates panic. Once it creates panic, it led to a lot of business closures at the time, and it also fed the black market growth. SI 118 of 2022, which legalized the USD use for 5 years. It announced the US dollar would remain the legal tender until 2025. The problem is another legal guarantee, again issued by decree. The effect being that slight reassurance, of course, yes, but credibility weakens, given the previous reversals, announcements and reversals. And then lastly, I would mention SI 218 of 2023, which introduced the Zimbabwe gold currency. It introduced the Zimbabwe gold currency in April 2023. It was backed partly by gold and foreign reserves. The problem, though, is that introduced by statutory instrument, again, like all other statutory instruments, rather than an act of parliament. The effect, though, is, yes, initial stabilization amidst allegations that it is stabilization by scarcity. But doubts remain also over transparency and sustainability. Because until when, since the plan also is to launch it as the sole currency of the country, we understand that is by 2030. And then we are going to flood the market with that currency. What is going to happen to it? So the pattern you can see from all of this is that we have got centralization of control. Treasury and RBZ, they bypass parliament, the ruling economy through lawfare. I still remember Jonathan Moyo, sometime I think it was towards the elections of 2023, in one of his rants on social media on X, I think he stated that in Zimbabwe, instead of laws being made by the parliament, so parliament in Zimbabwe, we've got the National Assembly, which is parliament, the lower house, which is parliament, my MPs, and then you've got the Senate, which are also part of parliament. They are all members of parliament. They are all members of what is called the legislature. The purpose of the legislature, I'm sure people, if you can understand from your primary school studies, where you say government has 3 arms in Zimbabwe. Government has 3 arms: the legislature, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So the legislature is your MPs and it's your senators. These are the people, constitutionally, they are supposed to be the ones that are making laws. But it appears in Zimbabwe for some time now, the laws are not being made in parliament. They are being made in cabinet. It's a minister who comes and introduces. It's the executive which comes and introduces laws, which is more of a top-down approach, which Okay, I'm not a legal expert, but that does sound illegal for me. It does sound somehow illegal, but that is where we are today as Zimbabwe, where we are ruling the country by statutory instrument. A minister thinks of making a command stick or to make a policy direction, and for them to do that, they need a legal instrument. So what they do, they come up with statutory instruments, and they impose them even on the parliament. The parliament is probably its weakest it has ever been, probably ever since the dawn of vibrant opposition in Zimbabwe by the formation of MDC. Ever since 2022, probably we've got the weakest parliament right now, with no spine at war, with no power, with no numbers, with nothing. It has been also, I must add, it has been captured, as we have been saying all along. So what we have right now is we have legalism greater than economics. Short-term statutory decrees, they replace structural policy. The outcome is a predictable cycle, which is you decree a policy, the market panics, and then you reverses, and then you bring again a new decree. Now we wait for another decree that makes ZiG the loan official currency. Now this over-reliance on statutory instruments is a symptom of Zimbabwe's lawyer politician elite. They treat economics as a legal problem to be fixed with instruments, not a technical challenge that needs technocratic policy. The result is that we have a fragile, lawfare-based economy where legal decrees, they substitute for industrial strategy, for fiscal discipline, and for long-term planning. In Zimbabwe, both ZANU-PF and opposition leadership structures, they show this dominance of low backgrounds, often channeling politics into court battles, constitutional debates, and elite power struggles. You can see even how Douglas Mwanzora took MDCT. It was through the courts. It was through lawfare. Even though it was clear that he did not have the numbers, the people were not backing him. He does not have the people. Recently, it's shown even by the participation of his party in the Epworth by-election, where they got, what was it? I think less than 200, less than 300 votes, thereabout. So this is a problem in Zimbabwe, and the mismatch between Zimbabwe's developmental needs, which are industrialization, technological innovation, economic diversification, and the dominant skill set of its political elites, the lawyers, it helps explain this persistent underdevelopment. Contemporary analysis argue that engineering states, they deliver infrastructure, industrial upgrades faster than your legalistic states. In comparison, we can mention China as we have the replacements of revolutionary cadres with the technocrats who are our engineers, the natural science, those with the natural science backgrounds in top posts, as well as in top posts is well documented. It linked to an outcome-focused governance style that pushed infrastructure and manufacturing. And then we have got Singapore. I love Singapore. Now, although Lee Kuan Yew himself was a lawyer, the state built a meritocratic, technocratic cabinet and administration. Leaders were selected from the bureaucracy or professions for performance and domain expertise. It is not about banning lawyers. That's not my argument. It's about surrounding them with hard-skilled technocrats and giving technocrats primacy in economic delivery. And Zimbabwe's political marketplace selects for courtrooms, for courtroom excellence over problem solving in production, energy, agriculture, logistics, and finance, to mention just a few. The result is that legalist politics excels in drafting statements. You can tell even ZANU-PF, their manifestos, excellent manifestos, but comes to execution, zero, because they are not technocrats at the top. There are no technocratic structures to make sure that those manifestos, they are implemented. So what we do is we've got legalistic politics that excels at drafting statements, filing cases, and arbitrary legitimacy, but struggles with designing and executing multi-year industrial and infrastructure programs. The lawyer heavy elite that we have, I would say the agenda time spent on constitutional fights, party statutes, litigation, and electoral challenges, it really leads to opportunity costs for the country, and also the fewer technocratic teams working on, let's say, electricity reliabilities, logistics corridors, agro productivity, and export upgrading. We don't have all those. That's why I would say that when it comes to logistics corridors, the infrastructure that was left by Ian Smith is what we have today in Zimbabwe. It has even disintegrated to this point. But then you compare and contrast that with countries where elites are embedded, the engineers, the economists into the command post of the state. You see faster execution in ports, like in China, like in power, in electricity, energy, housing, and also industry. Someone would point that, but Lee Kuan Yew was a lawyer. Yes, he was a lawyer, but my claim is not lawyers are bad or lawyers equals to breaking bad. No. It's that systems dominated by lack of skills without strong technocratic counterweights, they underperform. Singapore solved this by institutionalizing technocrats around a lawyer prime minister. Some Zimbabwean lawyers did deliver EGBT. Yeah, that is very true. Individuals can back the pattern. My point is about aggregate composition and institutional incentives, not singling out personalities. And now my recommendations are these. Number one, you need a candidate mix. Parties must adopt internal rules that field certain percentage of candidates with systems, transport, economics, health systems. Okay, let's start this again. Parties, they must adopt internal rules to field certain percentage of candidates with STEM, economics, public management backgrounds in winnable seats and key portfolios. You know we are going to win this seat. You know the history of that constituency that we are likely to win this. Like in Zimbabwe, you would know that the opposition can win the over 90% of the urban seats. Why don't they identify and prop up people that have excelled in STEM products, in STEM subjects in those constituencies? ZANU-PF, you know you can win village or rural constituents. Now you put your best people there. You don't put them in the urban. You put your engineers, you put your scientists, you put your economists, you put them in the village. Come on, Chris Muchangwa is an economist. And to be fair enough, you have been very instrumental in coming of Manize. And if I'm not mistaken, there is another Chinese investor who is also in Norton. But you know you can't win Norton. So you don't have to contest in Norton. Go into the village, contest in the village, win in the village, and you come into parliament. When you come into parliament, you can be appointed a minister. We may need a man with such achievements. At least he has a background. He has done a little bit. He can say, I've earned my stripes. But it's not bringing food to our tables. But what have you done? Have you brought investments into the country? Yes, yes, 2 of them. But then politically, he makes a mistake. A contest in the urban areas. You know the urban areas. ZANU-PF can't win in the urban areas. So that same applies even to opposition. Your best people, your best candidates, you put them in the urban areas. Not only to contest as MPs, but also as councillors. Especially there, we really need very competent people, because as a councillor, the delivery within the seat is dependent on the competence of the councils. And what we have been seeing in councils of late, not of late, for a period now, it has been disaster. It has been disaster. So my second recommendation is shadow delivery cabinet. Name shadow ministers with domain expertise in various sectors. for example, in economics, in healthy, state-owned enterprise reform, and give them, let's say, 100-day plans with metrics. And then we have got technical fast stream as my third recommendation. Create non-partisan technocratic corps, your engineers, your data scientists, your agronomists, your actuaries, seconded into ministries for fixed terms to execute flagship projects. And it has to be intentional. And then number 4 is rewire incentives. The political promotion to project delivery. Tie political promotion to delivery, to project delivery. For example, how many megawatts have you added to the grid before we appoint you Minister of Energy? How many kilometers of feeder roads? How many export volumes before we appoint you Minister of International Trade? Not like a wins or media hits. And then the last one being public finance backbone. Pay every lawyer, minister with a CFO, grade economist, and a program management office. Require benefit cost analysis for even for budget spend. Because we now have to treat the country as a company. If you are leading a country into loss and then you get fired, we need delivery. So in my conclusion, this has been going for some time. So here's my conclusion. Zimbabwe doesn't just suffer from corruption or sanctions. It suffers from leadership imbalance. For 40 years, we have built a political system dominated by lawyers and excel at lawfare, but it struggles with engineering development. Meanwhile, nations that empowered technocrats, engineers, economists, scientists, they turned themselves into global powers. If we want to escape this cycle of decrease, court battles, and economic collapse, our politics must and has to change. That means intentionally promoting technocrats into key roles, tying political success to delivery, no legal tricks, and rebuilding our government as if it were a corporation accountable for results. Until we make that shift, Zimbabwe is going to remain a courtroom nation without factories. The choice is clear. Do we want more arguments, or do we need more industries? I know where I stand. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.